Welcome to the FasCat podcast. I'm your host, Frank Overton. Some call me the Big Cat. And today we have Ask a FasCat Q&A number 16. We're also joined by Lacey Rivette.
Hey, everyone.
She is our community manager and registered dietitian. And we are going to answer 21 of your questions, user submitted. Inspired as always. We're going to cover topics from gravel to 20-minute field testing to residual fatigue, getting tired, coaching advice, and we are going to wrap up with questions about cyclocross, to race or not to race, and then some of the subjective elements of analyzing your power data. Lacey, so we just get right into it so that we can answer more questions in the time that we have?
The more the better. So our first one comes from Brian Beara. He posted in our forum. He's a longtime FasCat athlete. He's from California, and he is coached by Coach Isaiah. And he says, I'm new to gravel and I'm planning to do an event with a fair amount of descending, including over a mile on a steep 9% descent. The roads in that area are hard-packed dirt with some loose rock and washboarding. If I only have 2 weekends to practice with a rented gravel bike, what skills should I work on? And is it worth doing a practice ride or two on the actual roads?
It is definitely worth your time to ride the course, Brian. This is what we call course recon, and it's enormously beneficial. Course recon is something we've been doing for years as mountain bikers and cyclocross racers. And it would behoove you as a gravel racer to adopt those principles as well. By riding the gravel course, which you can do in training, we actually recommend it in our gravel simulation rides. It's like ride the course if you can. You'll see every nook and cranny of the course. You'll see the turns. You'll see the size of these loose rocks that you mentioned. You'll be able to verify if there's smooth lines through them or if there's not. And then on like race day, if there's not like smooth lines through, then you'll know you need to like check your speed, for example, before you enter in that section and not pinch flat. The course recon is your chance to test out tire pressure and even tire tread. Again, this is very common with cross-country mountain biking and cyclocross courses. You know, the day before the race, whenever I would travel to a cross-country mountain bike race, you do your openers on the course. You do that with cyclocross when possible as well. And that's your time to obviously do your physiological portion of your workout, but you're also inspecting the course and you're getting a feel for, okay, I'm going to need a knobby tire. I'm going to need a all conditions tire. Or you can also say, oh, this is just there's nothing to worry about on this course. And that's going to help you ride as fast as you want on race day. But yeah, inspect the descents. With this course, it sounds like you mentioned hard pack. So in our experience, at least here in Colorado in the Rocky Mountain region, a lot of the courses of gravel, they race like a road race. And 90% of your gravel skills are going to be your road bike skills. There's a lot of crossover. Maybe like 10% is different. But as we joke, the Boulder Gucci gravel is roadies. It's like no extra skills are required for the most part. Like Steamboat gravel, roadie. I mean, I rode my road bike on that course. But the other 10% is, here's like just one example. Be light in the saddle over the roots and the rocks to avoid pinch flatting. And what I mean is by being light is, if you have all your weight on the saddle and then you come up into a compression, like a root or a rock or a stutter bump, all your weight goes into that tire and it's going to compress and more likely to pinch flat if you're running tubes. We'll get into that in a second. But by running, so get out of the saddle, kind of hover your butt like maybe a half inch out of the saddle for a long, bumpy, continuous section. But if it's just one bump, you can even unweight your bike as you go over it, or you can just, kind of stand up out of the saddle. It helps a little bit. And you mentioned you're going to rent a gravel bike. Just make sure it's tubeless. That's pretty common in gravel bikes these days. But otherwise, if you have a tube in those tires, the probability that you flat over those washboards, roots, rocks is enormously higher. Virtually all gravel races or gravel racers are running tubeless. You know, Orange Seal, Stands, Panaracer has sealant. There's a variety of kinds. This also allows you to run lower pressure, and the lower tire pressure is going to absorb these bumps. So it's like mini shock absorption. So for instance, if you weigh 160 pounds, you have a 35 to 38 millimeter gravel tire, start with like 40 psi in there. It's going to feel nice and squishy on the pavement, but it's like a Cadillac once you get out there on the gravel, and it's going to absorb those stutter bumps. And because it's tubeless, there's no tube to pinch flat. The only thing you need to really worry about is the sidewall flats. We could do a whole podcast on this. The reason why I like the Panaracer Gravel King SKs is they do have that sidewall protection, which loyal listeners will remember too. I've like cried a river immensely over my 2018 Crusher and the Tusher sidewall flat in the lead. Anyway, I hope that helps. You know, try to just preview the course. I don't think you'll need any extra skills unless it's you know, a special circumstance, which I would, you know, need to talk with you about. But if you come up to any corner and it's loose, general rule of thumb, just slow down more. You're not going to win the race by railing a corner like you would in a criterium or a road race. So yeah, just, you know, feather that front brake, grab more of the rear, just to prevent your front tire from washing out, and yeah, just pick your way through it, and then get back on the gas when it's back straight again.
Yeah, also it's kind of like practicing your pre-ride meal. Like it gives you that peace of mind to know that you've inspected it, you know it works, and that you're ready to race. All right, so we're going to move on to our second question, and this one comes from John Hintz. He is posting on our forum. He is coached by Coach Jake, and he lives in Pennsylvania. He says, with the rise of online coaching, I'm sure there are a lot of listeners out there of different cycling levels who are relatively new to being coached. While there are tons of good podcasts out there on effective coaching, what I've yet to hear is tips for the newly coached. Could y'all give us some do's and don'ts or tips and tricks that will help us maximize both our relationship with our coach and the gains we get out of being coached?
Yeah, great question, John. I mean, this is what we specialize in. So while we don't call ourselves beginner coaches, by having an interview with Coach Jake, and he, you know, you do the new athlete questionnaire and then you have the coaching consultation, he knows where you're at in your relationship to how long you've been cycling. He knows you're a beginner. And then the best thing to do, the number one tip I would, you know, tell you is let Coach Jake, apply his expertise for you and essentially do what he says. And my advice to you as a beginner is be a good communicator and follow that custom training plan he's designing for you. And your job is to tell Coach Jake your goals. And then Coach Jake's job is to tell you how to achieve those goals. And he's going to do that in the form of that custom training plan he designs for you. So make it turn green and FTFP. That's your secret sauce to achieving your goals. And that's the beauty of coaching, is that applies to beginners and to pros. And with regards to being a good communicator, this is important. And you don't need to be a pro to be a good communicator. You can, you know, every single coached athlete out there can be a good communicator. And go back and listen to our podcast about leaving post-activity comments and being coachable. That's what we call it. It's a good one. And I think you'll see you can be coachable if you're a good communicator and you're open to new ideas, and you basically let Jake use his years of experience and creativity and just expertise. And that's what we do. We tell athletes what to do on a daily, weekly, annual level. So yeah, follow the plan. Then thanks for being a FasCat athlete, John.
All right, on to number 3. This one comes from Hannah Hamilton, she sent this in via email. She's from Texas, and she's on our weights plus base plan. She says, I'm currently FTFPing on the weights plus base intermediate plan and am taking a proper rest week. What's strange is that while I'm not getting sick, I actually feel more tired and run down this week than I do during normal workouts. After this week, I have about 10 days left of the plan, so perhaps it is just residual fatigue of the last 14 to 15 weeks. Do you have any insight into why this may occur, and also any tips for making a rest week successful?
Yeah, great question, Hannah. And it does sound like you got some residual fatigue going on, and you may need a custom rest week designed into your plan. We do advocate listening to your body, which may seem contradictory to FTFPing, but FTFPing is more from a training habits perspective and developing good training habits. In this case, your body is telling you you may need rest. And I like to say your body is the boss, and you may benefit from a customizing a rest week in there. That's what we do as coaches all the time. We listen to our athletes. They may start off with their, following their custom 4-week plan, and then they get like 2 or 3 weeks into it. And then their post-activity comments, they're like, I'm tired. We'll see, maybe they don't, make that great a power in a couple of workouts in a row. And that's just a sign. Okay. And then you may know that you've been, kind of overloading the athlete and trying to push them. And then that's what you have to be flexible. And that's why you have to monitor your athletes' training. And then when they say they're tired and their power is low, it's like, okay, yep, time for a rest week. And then you make a revision. That's what we do as coaches. Now because you're your own coach following the plan that we design, you're going to want to edit that plan yourself, which is possible in Training Peaks. It's super easy. What makes a good rest week? Per your question, the first 2 days off. So I like to lead off a rest week with Monday, Tuesday off. Bam. Remove all residual fatigue, no bike riding. A very short workout on Wednesday. If they've been riding an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, for example, make Wednesday 45 to 60 minutes. And then it depends on the time of the year for which workout. Then Friday's going to be off. And then for a rest week, I like to encourage athletes to take one weekend day off. I call it the rare Sunday off in many cases, like allow them to do a social ride on a Saturday, but at a much shorter than what is during a normal training week. And then on Sunday, it's like, hey, when's the last time you didn't ride on Sunday? Go ahead and take it in the spirit of the regeneration week. A lot of athletes are like, oh, that sucks. And it's like, yeah, but this is a rest week and you're actually accomplishing something. The whole thing about listening to your body and your body is the boss, it reminds me of what Greg Henderson used to say about training. And he would say, it's like wrestling a gorilla. And you don't say when you're done, the gorilla says when you're done. And it doesn't quite exactly apply here, but I just really like this story because Hendy's approach to training is amazing. He's the most hardcore athlete I've ever witnessed in practice. And so I always listen to what Hendy said with regards to his training. And for the listeners out there, look up Greg Henderson. He was a world tour pro. He was Andre Greipel's lead out guy in the Tour de France, and he literally led Andre Greipel out to several Tour de France stage wins. Greg used to live here in Boulder when he was coming up through the ranks, and we would do a group ride at 5 p.m. in the summer and show up and smash each other to bits for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, super duper hard. Greg would go out and train in the mountains for 5 hours prior to that. So he'd show up at the group ride coming off of a 5-hour ride and then proceed to whoop us all in this group ride. And I asked him about it one day after he dusted us in the sprint. He's like, well, I'm training for to be a Tour de France rider, not to be an American bike racer. I digress, but I hope that answers your question. Just listen to your body, Hannah, and just keep it real. Don't, in this case, maybe not. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but maybe not FTFP.
Yeah. Kind of, you might have to just think about that rest week as part of your training. Like, I mean, it is, you're absorbing the work and maybe you've put in a lot of work and your body needs a little bit extra time to take it all in. All right, so now we're going to move on to number 4. This one comes from Paul Coate. He is from Virginia, and he is on our 18 weeks of sweet spot plan. He actually had 2 questions, and his first one is, I've been doing well FTFPing, and I've been getting up at 4:30 a.m. to do so, and I've been steadily driving up my TSS. However, I've gone over the TSS in some of my workouts, and by Sunday, only had 80 TSS to get to my goal for the week, when that day's prescribed TSS was 100. So my question is it the right call to finish my ride when I reach the weekly TSS and not go over? Likewise, is it okay to do extra sweet spot efforts or ride in zone 2 to accumulate extra TSS during the week if I do not think that I'll have time to hit my TSS numbers on the weekend?
Okay, Paul, number 1, how much sleep are you getting each night? 4:30 is some serious early bird watts. And that means to get 8 hours of sleep, presuming you're waking up at like 4 a.m., you need to be going to bed at 8 just to get like maybe 8 hours if you don't toss and turn. If you're getting less than 7 hours a week, 7 hours of sleep each night, you're going to either need to go to bed earlier or give sleep more priority than the workout in the morning. And I know we advocate, masters athletes, doing their workouts in the morning, but the caveat to that is not at the expense of a good night's sleep. I see a lot of athletes do this, and then the workaround possibly is get 8 hours of sleep, find another time in the day to ride. And with regards to TSS, it could be your FTFP, your FTP is set too low. And my question for you would be, when was the last time you tested? Oftentimes when TSSs come easily to athletes, it's because your FTP is set too low. The numbers are artificially high, and that's often the culprit. So that, in sleeping aside, I would say FTFP your plan day to day. And if you go over on the final day, that's okay. And if you're recovering well beyond that downstream, you can call that extra credit TSS and CTL, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Paul actually also left us a review on the website, so we're going to go ahead and read that 5-star review from Paul. Hashtag FTFP. He says, I've been listening to the podcast for a while now, and shows I've missed in the past, I've gone back and listened to. So much good content on all aspects of getting fitter and faster. From off the bike, on the bike, and in the kitchen, they offer so much good content that you can put into practice to make yourself a better athlete.
And Paul goes on to say, with their common mantras of FTFP, winning in the kitchen, the shit that will kill them, cry in the dojo, and more, they are able to illustrate that it's not one aspect of your life that will impact your performance, but all the pieces together. That, when managed correctly, will get you the performance you want. Trust the process and the results will follow. Everything they preach is in their plans. Just feel yourself getting faster. Yeah, well, thank you, Paul. That just feel yourself getting faster is from one of our YouTube videos about what to eat for breakfast when we made the rice, kale, and eggs. And head over to our YouTube channel to check that one out. Paul, that was a very cheeky inclusion there. I like it. I can tell you're a very detailed oriented viewer and watcher. So thank you for the review and your question here in the podcast today.
And his second question, speaking of his questions, he says, what do you recommend doing for workouts leading up to an event when that event falls in the middle of a plan? I don't want to restructure too much as far as my 3-week build and regeneration week goes, as that seems a bit complicated, but I do want to be able to give a good effort at these races. Should I just change the workouts during the week leading up to the events to make them less taxing?
So that's really like a custom coaching question, Paul, just because it just depends on so many factors. We need to look at the big picture when you're for your question. And I would go back and listen to our A race, B race, and C race podcasts when referencing training through C races and maybe B races, and then prioritizing A races. And those impacts if they have on your goals. We're going to get into a question from a cyclocross racer in the next few questions. It's along the similar lines. It's to race or not to race. It's yeah, it's generally a custom coaching question. This is what we do. This is our bread and butter, is integrating your races into your training plan.
All right, number 5 comes from Jeff Beaumont. He posted in our forum. He's from Indiana, and he is a longtime FasCat athlete who follows our advanced plans. And he says, my question pertains to the philosophy of long-term development. I spent most of 2020 developing a bigger base. Unfortunately, I contracted COVID, and a lot of my gains went out the window, though I'm still stronger than when I started. My goal is to end up on the USA Crit Series and race in amateur nats. When I look at my peak numbers, I feel that I'm at least 12 to 18 months of good, consistent training from reaching that goal. So could you shed some light on what mindset I should have as I move forward towards this long-term goal? Does it involve sacrificing race results to build aerobic capacity, being stale from dedicating myself to weight training while still crushing the miles? Any advice is greatly appreciated.
Yeah. So, hey, Jeff, I mean, I would encourage you to develop as much as you can with regards to racing your bike as much as you can. If you want to do amateur nationals, you're going to need to have as many criteriums under your belt as possible. That's where the development comes. It doesn't necessarily, you got to train, there's development in the training, but to become a smart, savvy, cheeky, tactically smart, astute bike racer, you need 30 to 45 crits per year of experience. You'll get hella good training during those crits. So maybe not worry about that part of your training. But because there's much more to a criterium training and winning or just even doing well than your power output. It's that joke that people make about Zwift these days is, you get super good on Zwift and then you go out and you crash in the first corner, because there's a lot, crits are an extremely technical discipline of cycling, especially in the cornering and drafting department. And then you need to have the tactical experience, the speed work that comes from knowing what moves to go with or not go with. How are you going to win a sprint? I mean, you don't learn that by training. You got to go out and get yourself in those, put yourself in those moments and to learn from as much as possible. So race as many crits as you can. That's your mindset. You can focus on your numbers in training, but I'm not sure where you came up with these goals for what numbers you need to have. Focus on the results from your crits. If your goal is to win amateur nats, you need to be like podiuming, with some degree of regularity. Yeah, because when you go over to nats, guess what? That the level of competition is much higher. It's not like you're racing a local crit anymore. All of a sudden, you're racing the best in the country, and everyone else has been training and as much as they possibly can. That's when you get the hitters at nationals. So it's extremely competitive. So you need to go to races like Dairyland. Just go to the biggest crits all over the country as you can and get as much experience. And with regards to being a technical savvy crit racer and your numbers and your power, I mean, you still need to lift weights in the winter. You still need to build a big base after that. You still need to do your criterium intervals training plan after that and train as hard as you can, but you got to race. And I know crit racers. I've done a lot of crits. I've won crits, and I didn't do it right off the bat. It took years of crit racing. And I know there were crit specialists out there that had like not one third, I would say like 75% less FTP than I did. And they were smarter. They could draft better, they could corner faster, and then they could light it up in the sprint. That was not my forte. So there's going to be guys out there that are way more experienced, not necessarily as powerful. They're just better technically. And that's going to get you a lot further. So that's why I'm saying focus on as much racing as you can. Yeah, and then if you do well, great, keep doing it. If you don't do well, make sure you learn from that moment and apply it the next crit. That's why you want to race crit after crit after crit, weekend, weekend, weekend. Do the Wednesday night crits, do the Thursday crits. I'm not sure where you live. Where does Jeff live? Indiana. Not, I don't know of any weeknight crit series is there. Like unlike like Texas and other parts of the country, but if you're in Indiana, you should be at Dairyland. That's 2 weeks of crits every day. Yeah, yeah, you'll get some great experience. That's where you go to learn how to crit, hands down. That's yeah. Coach Jake's been there. Coach Isaiah's been there. Allie has been there. I don't think Lacey has raced a crit. Maybe a fat
Not a
tire
roadie.
crit.
I'm all about the dirt underneath my tires.
Yeah. But yeah, and then guess what? If you don't have success one season, that doesn't mean you can't achieve your goal of amateur nats. You need like, I mean, when I was a crit racer, I did like, 5 years in a row. And you progress each season. So stick with it, keep going. It's hard for me to know where you are in your progression. Maybe you already are winning and everything, but if you don't like podium at Nats one year, guess what? You're going back the next year and the next year. It's kind of it sounds like you're a lifer, so
He sounds
keep
pretty
doing
tenacious. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Next question.
All right, the next one is from Matt Dube. He posted on our forum. He lives in Colorado, and he's on our 32-week off-season plan. He says, I'm starting the hypertrophy phase of the 10-week resistance plan and would like to know how to approach the 150 TSS rides when winter weather makes outdoor riding not possible. I ride indoors for hour-long efforts, but 2 to 3 hours seems like too much. I am fortunate enough to be able to cross-country ski, so what are your thoughts on substituting half of my indoor riding with cross-country skiing or even all cross-country skiing? It's a lot of cross-countrying in there.
So Matt, one approach is to park your butt on the saddle indoors until you achieve 100 to 150 TSS. I do not think 2 to 3 hours indoors is too much. You may think it is, but check your mindset. I know several athletes that are doing that. Coach Jake is level 50 on Zwift by now. Last week's podcast, he was level 49, but he's probably level 50 now. He rides 3 hours on the rollers indoors, and he likes it. So, 2 to 3 hours is not that much. It's just really comes down to what your goals are and what you're willing to do to achieve them. So that's the simplest approach to FTFPing. With regards to cross-country skiing, it's kind of like a two-part question. It's wonderful. I did a ton myself. It's a tremendously good aerobic training, and 1 hour of cross-country skiing, like skate skiing style, often equates to the same TSSs as like a 3-hour ride, but it's not sport specific. You're getting a lot of arms in there. My thoughts, I kind of alluded to this, is it just depends on how aggressive you are towards achieving your goals. What are your goals? How soon are they? Like one thing that I do with athletes with regards to cross-country skiing. So take, for instance, they're training for an event in April or May. So cross-country skiing is totally on the table in December and January. But once you get to February and March, when that goal becomes closer, then they need to put the time in the saddle and maybe cross-country ski less. So no matter what you do, but on the other hand, maybe you're just like, I don't really have any goals this year. And even when I do, I just want to be fit. And so I would just consider or call that maybe not as aggressive as goals, in which case then cross-country skiing sounds wonderful. Go for it. And no matter what you do, take your bike computer with you, put it in your back pocket or your pocket, hit stop, start, just like you would on a normal bike ride, and wear your heart rate monitor and upload that data to your Training Peaks account, especially that heart rate data. You'll get an HRTSS. You'll be able to look at average your heart rates for various portions, and you can just check how productive you are for the cross country skiing. And so one thing that I do, one athlete that I'm working with right now, he's cross country skiing, and he's a beginner, so to speak. So he has to stop a lot because cross country skiing, for everyone out there that's good at it, they know that they've got their glide down. You can kind of ski a little bit lower intensity, but when you're a beginner, it's like a zone 5 effort. And then you get so tired, you have to stop. At least that was my experiences cross country skiing. Is so then you stop, then you have to catch your breath for 2 or 3 minutes, then you start again. And it just winds up being not as good of an effort as like a solid 3-hour ride. Now, Lacey, I know you're a brand new cross country skier. Does that kind of jive with your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, my first time, I think I was out there for 3.5 hours, and I was moving time like an hour 45. I will say
Yeah.
that my friends, I don't know, I don't have anybody to compare myself to. They say I'm a natural. So like now when I'm going, I can easily get in a solid 2 hours with very few stops. So it really just depends on your, like you were saying, your level. And whether like, is that better than the weekend group ride that you're doing? I know like for me with my team, if I go, we do a mountain bike like group ride, we stop a ton because we have so many riders with different abilities. So if it's behooves you to get more time in and be more active skate skiing, in the December, January timeframe, it's definitely a doable option, I think. Still need to get on the bike though, of course, race specific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like an individual circumstance. And it's a great question. We're big fans of cross country skiing, but I just want to also let all the listeners know that 2 to 3 hours on the trainer when you want to achieve your goal really bad is just how you do it.
I will skate ski, but I've been known to do 5-hour trainer rides, so it's doable.
Woo.
Take a little break in there. You go meal prep a little bit, get your rice going, get in a solid 45 minutes, or that's for brown rice. Yeah, multitask.
Yeah, Coach Jake, he'll bust out a 3-hour ride, no problem.
It's impressive. All right, on to number 7. This one comes from Tyler Goodyear. He posted in our forum, and he is from Bentonville, Arkansas, which has great mountain bike trails, I might add. And he is a monthly coaching subscription athlete. And he says, how do you perform well and recover from B races while simultaneously growing your CTL? Is there a trade-off between short tapers for B races versus training through your B race in order to maximize your CTL so you can peak later in the season? I asked because in 2021, I want to peak for cross season, but I also have a few mountain bike marathon and XCO races I'd like to participate in during the spring and summer.
Yeah, so this is the cyclocross question I alluded to in the previous question. And it's a classic case of exchanging one's greater goals of your cyclocross season for your mountain bike and cross country races. And one of the biggest mistakes we see amateur cyclocrossers make is they race too much in the summer. And then when they get to the fall, they don't have any base. They've been racing. So they don't have the ability to peak for their cyclocross races in the fall, or especially if they're going to nationals. And so when cyclocross became really popular in the US in the 2000s, all of a sudden you had guys like Mark Gullickson and our very own coach Brandon who began to specialize in cyclocross. And that was, by specialize, I mean they did not race in the spring and summer. The cyclocross was their main season. And was a contrast because up until that point, cyclocross was just a bunch of mountain bikers and roadies getting together in the winter just to, do some racing and have some fun. But guys like Gully and Brandon took it really seriously and they focused on it and they started racing less mountain bikes in the summer. And what that enabled them to do is in the summer, that's your time to build up your base for cyclocross. And then approximately August 1st, based on, a cyclocross season starting Labor Day, mid-September, from August 1st for then you do your traditional switch from base to race. You do our legendary plan, the 6 weeks till cyclocross. And that's when you do your cyclocross prep. So when Coach Brandon has a secret training tip to race or not to race, and that's with regards to your exact question, Tyler. So I would give it a read. The thing about tapering for B races in the summer, you're going to be unable to peak for your A races in the fall and the winter. You'll give up too much CTL over the course of the summer. And so I wouldn't recommend that. But it goes to what your goals are, or what your goals are for cyclocross, and how do those relate to your goals for the summer. But it does sound to me like your A goals are in the fall, and then you have, because you mentioned B races in the summer. So do not taper for those. If you taper for those, you're going to give up too much CTL. You'll lose too much base, nothing to draw upon in the fall. Make those C races, and then also entertain racing less, do more base. It's just a question of using your energy, and the guys that win nationals or do well in the second half of the season, they're the guys that have just been chilling out riding base all summer, and then they really pour it on in the fall. And then the cyclocross racers that kind of peter out and have like ripping good form at the beginning of the season, and then just have a decline in their performance all the way towards nationals, those are generally the athletes that are maybe raced a little too much over the summer. And I'm sure there's instances of athletes that have been able to successfully do it in other ways. I'm just saying this is just the general model that we would apply for amateur athletes, and also pros that want to peak or do well at nationals. And before I keep rambling on, I just want to read an excerpt of Brandon's tip because it's so good. And he says, and by the way, he won Masters Nationals not once, not twice, but 4 times. And he was also, before that, he was a regular top tenor at some of the Super Cup pro cyclocross races, raced over in Belgium, et cetera. And so he says, when I focused on having a successful cyclocross season, I pretty much stopped all racing in the spring and the summer, except for a couple of events. I would sign up for the Firecracker 50. He did this event for 2 reasons. One, it's super fun, and one, it got him to do longer rides, which were synergistic with his base. But this also comes, Brandon gave up the Norba National Mountain Bike Racing Series for cyclocross, and that's what he's talking about. So Tyler, maybe choose 1 or 2 races that you're super G'd up and that are fun, but race less is what kind of the gist of our answer is. That's a good question. Yeah, good luck in your cyclocross season too.
All right, moving on to number 8. This one comes from Kevin Fath. He posted in our forum. He's from Maryland, and he is on our Sweet Spot plans. He says, I'm wondering if you could walk us through some of the more subjective elements of analyzing our rides and what kind of notes we should consistently make after a workout. For example, how might I make a valid assumption of my RPE level and record it on a 75-minute 4x10 Sweet Spot ride? In parentheses, he put 92%. Love the attention to detail. Workout. Would that be different than how I assess my RPE on a 3-hour Sweet Spot group ride?
All right, great question, Kevin. So let's just get right into it, because your 75-minute 4x10 Sweet Spot ride is going to have a TSS of about 80 to 100. Your 3-hour Sweet Spot group ride is going to have a TSS of about 175 to 200. So double the training load. So how's that going to feel? Yeah, you're going to feel way more tired from that 3-hour ride than how you are going to feel for that 75-minute ride. So that's, maybe some of the more subjective elements, but it's supported by your power data, by just, a ride that's 3 times, or not 3 times, double as long, generally is going to have more fatigue to it. But when I look at power data, the first 3 things I look at is, did it turn green? What was the TSS achieved? And then I look at the athletes' post-activity comments and read what they had to say about that training ride. Generally, most folks are going to be fairly tired after a 200 TSS ride, whereas, a ride of 80 to 100, if it's Sweet Spot, is going to be, not near as tired, and so they can move on. Thus the Sweet Spot. So look at your TSSs to support the subjective elements of analyzing your rides.
All right.
Okay.
On to number 9. This one comes from Casey Faust. They follow us on Instagram, or he follows us on Instagram from California, and he's on our 18 weeks of Sweet Spot plan. Says, I'm coming to the end of my 18 weeks of Sweet Spot here in a week or two, and I'm already thinking about my FTP test. Currently, my FTP is at 268. How can I estimate, or should I estimate, what to aim for? I don't want to aim too high and blow myself up and do poorly, but I also don't want to aim too low and be wishing I had went harder. I was thinking of shooting for around 290 to 300 average for the 20 minutes. Does this sound reasonable?
Casey, if we knew, I would absolutely tell you, but this is why we test, because we don't know, like you don't know what your power is going to be. Otherwise we might save you the pain and the suffering of the 20-minute test. It's one of those hindsight is 2020 things. It simply go as hard as you can for 20 continuous minutes. And if you do that, you'll do it right. A lot of athletes are very nervous about going too hard or too easy, but if you just forget about that and they're worried about pacing and blowing up and, making their power go wrong, simply look at it as this: 20 continuous minutes of your best, hardest effort. And if you go too hard, that may happen, but just keep going. Don't stop. And what is going too hard? What everyone fails to mention is quitting. So don't quit. If you go too hard, that's okay. Keep going. For the whole 20 minutes. You can quit after the 20 minutes. That's kind of your carrot. So yeah, too many athletes want there to be this formulaic plug and play answer for their watts, and particularly the field test. And if you blow up, so what? Learn from it and just maybe use that knowledge for the next time you do a test. But if you do go out too hard and you do think you're blowing up, that doesn't give you a reason to stop. You keep going for that 20 minutes. And most athletes, after they do one field test, they're like, oh yeah, I get it. You're going to get your average power from that number. Even if you did go out too hard, that's the beauty of power data. It's going to fix itself over the course of the 20-minute test. So it's almost, the 20-minute test is foolproof as long as you give it your best effort for 20 minutes, even if you go too hard, in my opinion, at a basic, beginner level. So that's the first part of the test. The second part is, and what this is maybe where your question is coming from. For some of our coached athletes, when they take a rest week before a 20-minute field test, in Hannah's question earlier, or maybe it was, I forgot that I was recommending like a training, what a rest week looks like. So Monday, Tuesday off. On Wednesday, you're going to do 2 by 10 minutes, full gas, 5 minutes in between, as hard as you can. And what you can do from that power data is take the normalized power from the beginning of the first 10-minuter all the way through to the end of the second 10-minuter, including that 5-minute rest break. And that normalized power right now, that literally proves what you can do for 20 minutes, because it's actually 25. And that's the minimum number you should pace at. And so what I'll have athletes do, go out and do that, take their 25-minute normalized power. That's the power that you should at least start your field test at. And so here's the recommendation. So 2 minutes at that 25-minute power and pace yourself. What's the number one rule of time trialing? Do not go out too hard. And so that's because a field test is essentially a time trial. Just, try not to go out too hard. And that 2-minute power from your 2 by 10 is going to help you determine what is and what is not too hard. So hang tight for the first 2 minutes. It's going to feel easy. It's counterintuitive. Everyone wants to start a field test and just make it, have it feel immediately difficult right from the get-go. But that's not how your body works when paced properly. So first 2 minutes, the effort is going to rise. First 30 seconds, you're going to be like, that it? And the answer is, yeah, this is it. But hang tight, because it's coming to you. And after 2 minutes, you're going to have felt the effort enough to be able to do the next 18 minutes by feel. And then what I tell athletes to do is, after that, just go as hard as you can. Because you're already 2 minutes in, there's very slim chances that you're going to go too hard from that point. So just dig in and do as much as you can for the next 18 minutes, and you're going to do it right. And if if for something happens, there's plenty of field tests coming at you in your cycling, you know, training plan and progression. We like to have athletes do it two to three times a year, and they're free, so you can do it again at any time. No extra cost to you. There's some mental matches or marbles, as I've described it, but yeah. So analyze your data and just draw your own conclusions from it.
Yeah.
With regards to 290 to 300, I think it sounds about right, but I would need to analyze your data and look at your historical, numbers and if there's any supporting evidence of that leading up, to support your assumption. Because, I would like to go out and do a field test at 325, but, you're going to need to see some 300s and 310s in training to support that. But it sounds like you do, so you're on the right track.
Yeah, indoor field tests can be hard, so set yourself up for success too. Maybe put on like a race in front of you, just to get you going. All right, number 10 comes from John McKenzie. He is a follower of ours on Instagram. He's from the UK, and he's on our Weights Plus Base plan. And he says, I'm well into and loving the 16 weeks Weights Plus Base plan and plan to follow it up with Sweet Spot Part 3 and then the XC mountain bike plan. I'm aiming to peak for an event at the end of May. What should I do if the event is canceled or moved? I know it seems pessimistic, but I'm in the UK and it's a real possibility. I'm worried I'm going to be in peak form for a non-existent event.
Yeah, so this is something we've been working through with our athletes a lot this year. And if you recall, in December, when we were beginning to think about this is when we wrote our 2021 race predictions training tip. And our general recommendation is to delay your form to later on in the season for exactly this reason, and to go ahead and go out on a limb and just make the judgment call yourself if this event is or is not going to happen. Sounds like it's probably not. So control your own destiny and just go ahead and take it off your program. You'll be race ready in case it happens, but just go ahead and plan to be on form in June or July. And so in order not to peak, to not be that group ride hero, the best way to do it is to keep raising your CTL. And so if you have that ability, keep sweet spot. If you're kind of already in the top 10% of where you can handle physically and from a time perspective, do sweet spot part 4. It will maintain your CTL. You'll get the adaptations from the 3-4-5 minute VO2 max progression, because it's that 2-day rest block. But then in the fatigue dependent training plan design, you'll hammer out some long sweet spot rides after that. Your CTL won't really go up, but it definitely won't go down. You'll hold that form, and then when you do get a race date, you can drop it 5 or 10%, and your TSP will shoot up, and you'll be on really good form, especially since you've done the 3-4-5 minute VO2 max progression. Once your CTL starts going down, that's when you're going to give up your hard-earned training load, and that's when you come on form, whether you like it or not. That's what happens to the group ride hero when you do too much training too soon, and you got nowhere to go to build upon to keep progressing the progression. This is just old school periodization. Now with CTL, we just have a model to show it out. So yeah, it sounds like kind of chill out right now and feather your training load and your build, and then just the beauty of the performance manager chart, model it out, and you just go ahead and maybe just go ahead and say that this event, it may not happen. Maybe it will, fingers crossed, but just definitely begin to develop some contingency plans.
All right, now on to number 11. This one comes from Melissa Killstrom. She is an Instagram follower. She's from Virginia, and she's a CX and gravel racer. She says, I've been off the bike for 3 months due to injuries from a spectacular mountain bike crash. It always seems that we fall with doing the easiest things. Feels like I'm basically starting back from ground zero. So my question is there a training plan for literally getting back in the saddle?
Yeah. So Sweet Spot One is just a great beginner training plan to get back into. It's fairly um, easy in the context. But sorry about your broken bone. That stinks. And one thing you can do, this is more mindset, is you can pull a Matthew Heyman. And if you don't know who Matthew Heyman is, he broke his elbow or arm or something about, oh, I don't know, like 10 weeks before he won Paris-Roubaix. And there are pictures of him on the internet. You can Google his name, of him riding his trainer with his whole arm with a cast past his elbow on a trainer. And because it was such a big cast, he had to prop his elbow up. He had a ladder next to his bike where he was putting his arm on to ride in his garage. And the cool part about this picture was there was a child's like riding toy behind it. So, he had the Dad Watts vibe going on. It's like this crammed into this garage. And here it is, this dude, this world tour level guy training indoors. And, he's that hardcore. And he went on to win the Paris-Roubaix a short time afterwards. And what I like to tell athletes is when you break a bone in their upper extremities, your legs are not broken. And if you can immobilize your upper body and do it in a safe way, you can do meaningful training on the trainer. I've broken my hand once, and I did like 6 weeks of training on the trainer, keeping my hand across my chest with one hand on the handlebar. And I was doing like VO2 max intervals. So your legs aren't broke. With regards to Sweet Spot Part One, probably the biggest thing you could do is just get back on the bike and do some zone 2 pedaling on the trainer now. And then even with this broken arm, and maybe put it across your chest, or I've broken a lot of bones. And you can rest it on the trainer if your cast is hard. I broke my hand one year as a mountain biker, and I couldn't wrap my hand around the handlebar, but I could hang my thumb on the hood of a road bike. So guess what I did? I went and did a bunch of racing as a roadie. I went to Super Week with a broken hand as a roadie. I couldn't do mountain bike racing, but I could sure, hang a thumb on a shifter because my legs weren't broke. I had like really good form and power. And so, Melissa, get back on the bike, do some zone 2 rides first. That's probably my biggest suggestion. Start with like 30 minutes, maybe progress to a 45 and 60-minute zone 2 ride. Do that like 2 or 3 or 4 times per week. And if that's going well, then you can jump into Sweet Spot Part One. And yeah, all those workouts can be done on Zwift also. So yeah, don't let the can't ride outside get in the way. Get on that trainer. And you can even export all the workouts from that Sweet Spot Part One plan to Zwift and use all the tech features. But I guess my biggest piece of advice is, just to get back on the horse, even though it bucked you off.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me, there's a ultra endurance mountain bike racer named Caitlin Boyle, and she did the same thing like you were talking about, getting on the trainer, even if it's just zone 2, and she had a sign on her handlebars that says, I get to. So look at it as like you are able to get back on the bike. It's a good thing. And just keep that positive mindset as you move forward.
That's right. Legs ain't broke.
All right, number 12 comes from David Irvine. He posted in our forum. He is from Australia, and he has been on our Winning in the Kitchen meal plans. He says, whilst I wouldn't think of myself as overweight, I know that a few seasons back, I was 5 or so kilos lighter than I am today, and I seem to be putting in a better performance. So I decided to try out the Winning in the Kitchen weight loss meal plan. Shout out to Lacey. Thanks, David. He says, I find it great for taking all the guesswork out of portion sizes, making sure I fuel enough for hard days and eat more greens than I ever thought possible. My question is, how can you tell what is the right weight for me to be at, which balances power and weight, so I don't just chase a number? How can I make sure I don't overdo the weight loss at the expense of power? What are the ways that I can look out for myself as opposed to doing as opposed to anything too scientific? Well, first, thanks for the positive feedback, David. I'll say this is a tricky question because like an athlete's ideal race weight is going to be different. Like say a track cyclist, they're going to have to be pushing a heavier gear. So they're going to have bigger quads. They're just going to be all around a little bit bigger versus like a pro tour rider who needs to be light for the climbs. Their ideal weights are going to be vastly different. But with that said, it really comes down to power to weight. And considering that you've been training for quite a while, it's not likely that you're going to see these big drastic jumps in your power like we would see for an athlete that's new to structured training. So taking the step and focusing on losing a few pounds is definitely the right decision to do in the off season. But back to your main question, if you do have power data from those previous seasons and you know what your weight was, I would look at those times and look at your peak power to weight ratios. Try to remember where you felt the best and use that as your goal for what your goal weight should be before you move into the base to race, because we don't want to be trying to lose weight during race season. And a way that you can look out for yourself while doing this is just by simply assessing how you feel like throughout the week. Do you feel tired? Is your recovery time between workouts greater? Are you losing more than a pound a week? If that's the case, you're probably cutting your calories too low. And that's going to impede your progress on the bike, which we don't want. In this case, I would suggest consuming just a few more calories, ideally immediately after your workout to recover, or if you feel bonkish on the bike, increase your like pre-ride meal and maybe a little bit on the bike, because let's be real, being bonkish on the bike, if you're a roadie or a mountain biker on the side of a cliff, is definitely not a safe option. So we want to avoid that. You can refer, I just made a video on pre-ride nutrition too, so you can go and look at that to get a better idea of what your meals should look like. I will say that though you're in the Winning in the Kitchen weight loss meal plan, those breakfasts are kind of tailored around our athletes because most of them are doing early morning workouts and they're eating around 90 minutes to 2 hours before. So those have about 70 to 80 grams of carbs. If you do have longer than that on your weekends, for example, but longer before that to eat before you ride, you can skip your AM breakfast and add around 40 to 50 grams of carbs to your breakfast on the weekends to make sure you're well fueled. If it's a weekday, you can add in around 20 to 30 grams of carbs if you skip that AM meal. So just another way that you can tailor the meal plan to fit your needs. But want to make sure you're well fueled.
Yeah, David, I mean, just monitor your power output in addition to what Lacey said. You know, if you're not feeling well on the bike and then you're making lower power, ding, 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 need to eat more. And you're not eating enough. Yeah.
It's a tricky thing to tackle, but it can be done. All right. The next one comes from Steve. He is an Instagram follower. He is on our 18 Weeks of Sweet Spot, and he says, I am on the 18 Weeks of Sweet Spot training plan. Should I be more concerned with getting my TSS number or hours on the bike? Right now, they are both pretty close to what the plan is calling for. I sometimes fall short on TSS, though. Thank you for putting these plans together.
So plus or minus 5 to 10% is fine, Steve. The plans are designed for the TSS and the durations to match up, because if you look at how TSS is calculated, it's calculated duration times intensity, and intensity being calculated from your normalized power, which it generates an intensity factor point, which is abbreviated IF. So you square IF, multiply that by the duration. That's how you arrive at your training stress score. So if you're following the plan and your FTP is set correctly, you know, hour and a half ride with the TSS from your workout they're gonna be pretty close. It's not an exact science because we're not robots out there on the bike, but 5 or 10% is to be expected.
All right, that was a short and sweet one. Number 14 comes from Patrick Frantum. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He posted in our forum. He's from Alabama, and he's on Sweet Spot Part 3. He said, this is my first season using FasCat plans. I'm really looking forward to my upcoming switch from base to race. My goal is to complete century rides with 3 to 5K of elevation gain in May and in August, which should take me around 6 to 7 hours to finish. My secondary goal is to be more competitive at my local group rides. My question is, which interval plan makes the most sense for my goals? Road racing, climbing, or Fondo? How do the plans prioritize or balance different zones / efforts in the interval workouts?
So I'll answer your first question first. Do all three, Patrick. Do the road racing plan, climbing plan, and the Fondo plan. That's 18 weeks of training, and the different types of intervals in each plan will help you become a more rounded century and Fondo and group rider. The VO2s and the anaerobic intervals in the road plan will help you get up the climbs that you'll see in your group rides, or just respond to the accelerations and changing in speeds, breakaways, moves, things in your group ride. They'll get you up. You mentioned you're from Alabama. For an event like the Chiaha Challenge, a very popular Fondo event in Alabama, do the VO2s, do the anaerobic work. That's why you also want to do the climbing intervals plan, because then there are longer climbs at Chiaha. So you want to be well-rounded and be able to do both. And then, of course, because it's a Fondo, do the Fondo plan. That's going to concentrate on midweek intervals, but then enough recovery, and then concentrate on those longer rides on the weekends, which define a Fondo or a century. You're going to need to be able to ride 5 and 6 hours for these really long events. So yeah, all three.
Should he do those simultaneously, or should there be another plan in there between? I feel like that's
that's 18 weeks of training, so that's back to back to back. You're going to do that after you've done your base, and most athletes should be done with their base and by April or May, and then you still have all summer. And so that's what I was referring to. Those would be the plans you're doing all summer. But 6 weeks and then continuous. That's for 18 weeks. I know the summer is a little bit shorter than 18 weeks, but
you can rock and roll.
That's right.
All right. Number 15 comes from Karen. She posted on our Instagram, and she is from British Columbia. She says, how critical are days off? I'm about to start the 18 weeks of sweet spot plan, but I'm also 38 days into a self-challenge to write at least 30 minutes a day for 365 days. On off days, it's an easy 30-minute spin, going to be counterproductive when it comes to #FTFPing.
So rest days are extremely important, Karen. Even Alaphilippe takes rest days. All the pros do. They're quintessential to getting faster. When you plant a garden and you water the seeds, and then you come back in a few days, the planting and the watering is like the training. And then the coming back in a few days is akin to the rest days in your training plan. So that's the adage, training is like growing a garden. And so I always say, honor the rest days, take them. For your challenge, one creative solution may be to do what's called an active recovery ride. And so active recovery rides are approximately 30 to 45 minutes in zone 1 only. Do not exceed zone 1. And so what we mean by not exceed is do not let your watts or your heart rate go above, go up into your zone 2 watts. It's really easy. It's embarrassing how slow you're going, but that's what defines and makes an active recovery ride. And so that could be what you do on your 30-minute spins for your bike commute. You'll just have to be really patient and pedal, counterintuitively slow. And then when done properly, active recovery rides can actually enhance your training. They're bringing oxygenated blood to your muscles. They're, oxygenated blood flushes out the metabolic byproducts, waste products of exercise. That's what they call a recovery flush, a recovery ride. That's the benefit, is bringing that oxygenated blood to those muscles that are fatigued, say from the previous days or weekends training. And then go on when your plan calls for a regular workout, obviously that fits into your challenge. And what you're going to want to monitor is just to make sure that you feel good after your recovery day. If you don't feel good, then you want to look at what's going on in your recovery rides, and to determine if it's a true recovery day. Also, if you do 30 minutes zone 1, you're going to get a TSS of less than 25. So maybe like, which is a drop in the bucket compared to what your training plan calls for. So whenever I see an athlete do a recovery ride less than 25, it's like check. And then, but if you see like those recovery rides being longer than 30 minutes or 45 minutes or having TSSs of greater than 25 or 30, then you're like, that's not a true recovery ride. And then you get a lot of macho riders that are like want to do like an hour and a half of zone 2, not a recovery ride. Other things to do to make sure that to really capitalize on this 30-minute active recovery ride is when you get off the bike, if it's in the summertime, get out of that hot environment. It could be a cold shower. It could be just getting back in, an air-conditioned room, fluids and food right after the ride, and then get off your feet. Don't do an active recovery ride if and then stand on your feet for 8 hours. So hopefully you have a desk job and you can sit, and even better, maybe you can like lie horizontal on the couch. And, so food, recovery, proper sleep. Yes. We could do a whole podcast. We have done a whole podcast on recovery. So yeah, check that one out too. Great question.
All right, number 16 comes from Klaas Bulks. He's an Instagram follower. He is from the Netherlands, and he is on our intervals for time trials. And he says, I would like to get advice on how to prep for a jump start of the road season, with currently no clue when this will be. I have finished the 10-week resistance plan, followed by the sweet spot plan. I am now starting intervals for time trialers, and I'm aiming for April being the start of road season. But how do I maintain form over a long period if lockdown leads to later race schedules?
Yeah, this is like the previous poster's questions about that event in the UK that he didn't know if it was going to happen or not. The answer, Klaus, is just more sweet spot. I think I replied to your post in Instagram and I asked you how much sweet spot you had done, and you said only 6 weeks. So you easily have, 1 to 2 more blocks of sweet spots. You could do 12 to 8, 6 to 12 more weeks of sweet spots, and then do your road intervals plan, and that will jumpstart your road season. And so you need to feather it based on when you think your season is, but you also want to be race ready. And so by building a bigger base with these sweet spot plans that I'm recommending, you'll have a greater aerobic endurance to make greater power off of when the time comes. So it's a great, most amateur athletes never build up an adequate or big enough base anyway. So this could just look at this as an opportunity to do so.
All right, moving on to number 17. This one also comes from an Instagram fan. His name is Mark Martin, and he is a road racer from Estonia. He says, how should one's FTP change through the seasons? Last spring, I hit 421 watts for 20 minutes, and in the fall, I only hit 390 watts. So this spring, I will aim for around 430 plus. And next fall, should I also drop, but not as low as last time? So the lows and highs during the season should always be a bit higher.
So, Mark, you want to monitor and update your FTP throughout the season as it's higher and lower. So it's the ebb and the flow. It's going to go up with good training and form. It's going to go down as you cycle through, off-season breaks and everything. And so what you want to, but there's usually a range that athletes have when they have certain fitness. And so you're going to have your FTP is going to probably be at its lowest point after your 2-week off-season break. And then it's going to maybe go up a little bit after the weights. And then usually where athletes see the greatest increase in their FTP is from the time when they begin their base training through the end of their high intensity interval training. So that's why we have athletes test at the beginning and the end. The first test is the bookend to set the zones. The second test is to measure the improvement. But yeah, FTP goes up, it goes down, daily, weekly, things like that. So think of it like that, and just monitor it. And if you're coming off of your weights in your base, I wouldn't expect your FTP to be as high as it was the previous summer. But then go do your base training and your intervals and see if you can't make your FTP at that point higher. So it's almost like you want to compare your FTPs to the same times of the year. So you got your off season, and then your off season FTP, and then you got your base season FTP, and then you got your race ready FTP. And that's another reason why I like we say your race data is your best data, because that's when you're on presumably your best form, and that's why we like the 20-minute test as well.
All right, good answer. Number 18 comes from Lambie05 on Instagram. He's from Australia and on our 10-week resistance training plan. He says, I have a rack at home and can easily do squats and hamstring curls. I don't have a leg press, in parentheses, who does, or a Viper tube. I replaced leg press with barbell lunges last year, but I found it difficult to control once I needed to push heavier weights, and also when doing light and explosive efforts. Would lunges still be the best option, or could I do one of the following instead? Box squat, deadlift, or trap bar deadlift. I've done each of these before in a heavy/slow and light/fast movement patterns and feel they might be better options.
So we are such a big fan of the Viper from Personal Improvement Experience that we designed a 12-week at home because of COVID training plan this year. And in that plan, we substituted the leg press from our traditional 10-week resistance training plan with the Viper lunges and kettlebell swings. And I'm not a fan of the deadlift nor the trap bar deadlift due to the years and years of instances I have of athletes tweaking their back from the deadlifts and trap bars, because it just puts you in a more precarious position. And you have to remember, we're cyclists and we're lifting weights to become better cyclists, not to like get gains or bulk up or anything like that. I mean, these are wonderful movements if you're an advanced level weightlifter. But because we do speak to mostly cyclists who may be new to resistance training, the Viper and kettlebell swings will accomplish nearly the same thing at a much lower risk. And so you can, do these movements fairly aggressively. You can do explosive Viper and kettlebell swings with little to none risk of tweaking your back. And then therefore you're setting yourself up for success. So we're such a fan of that. That's why we're recommending it. I'll put the how to use a Viper and swing video in the show notes. And that's what I would recommend, Lambie. And it was just a funky year with going to the gym or not being able to. And but what we did learn is a lot of people are already reporting they feel better on the bike from the Viper, from the kettlebells, than they did the previous off season from the leg presses. And so I think one of the things I learned as a coach is I may have a lot of athletes continue with that at home weightlifting resistance training next season, even if they can go to the gym, because they were benefiting more from it.
Always learning. All right, number 19 comes from Jamie Anzalone. He posts in the forum. He is from New York and he is coached by Coach Jake. He says, as one of Coach Jake's athletes, I've been Zwifting a lot. You know what could add a little more indoor motivation? A FasCat kit for Zwift. Maybe a big fat FTFP on it. Sorry, it's more of a request than a question, and I have no idea how hard that is to implement, but what do you think?
I think it's a great idea, James. We should even get Coach Jake to look into it. This has been a thing for years on Zwift, and we've looked into it in years past. There's actually a whole a process to it. I'd love to sport a big fat FTFP and even get some cheetah spot jerseys on Zwift. Because it's such a thing, there's a whole article over on Zwift Insider on the subject that explains the process, and he cites the limitation to apparently, at one point, maybe this has changed, there's a single designer over at Zwift that that has to design the jersey and then get it into the graphics of the game. We'll put that tip in the show notes. Maybe with the 450 million that Zwift just raised, they can hire a new designer or two, and then make this, the ability for us to submit the FasCat kit. But if anyone is out there from Zwift listening, call me or have your people call me. We'll get a FasCat jersey on their pronto. We have the artwork. It's ready to implement. We just never really been able to, but I would love to, James. Yeah, and we'll see you on the Zwift or Watopia.
All right, number 20 comes from Jake Yarmatter. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He posts in the forum. He's from Montana. He says, "I'm on the home stretch of the weights plus base advanced plan. I just did the FTP test and saw my number has decreased from 311 to 301. I figured it would decline, especially with a week off the bike and focusing on base miles and not the top end of the engine. My question would be, during the off season, should you see this number decrease more, or would you expect it to stay relatively close to the same?"
That's the $1 million question, Jake. We don't know, and it's hard to answer without being able to review your training. Your training is going to be the greatest influence of that. And if I were to review your training over the course of the last 60 days, is your training plan a lot of green? Did you FTFP? Did you make it turn green? Or is there a lot of red and yellow? The more red and yellow, the more likely is that could be the reason or the explanation for the decline. But it's really hard to see. For most athletes, a decrease from 311, I would say, when was that set? That's the other thing. If that was set last summer when you're on, summertime form, and then, and if that's the case, a small decline is reasonable and almost to be expected. A lot of athletes new to training, they, and this goes to the previous question, is your FTP goes up and it goes down. My FTP is pretty low right now. It's easily, 5 to 10% lower than what it is in the summer. And then you go through your cycles, you do your base, you do your weight training, you do your intervals, and then it goes back up again. So the 311 to 301, I'd want to know when those were. And and if that's the case, a small decline is reasonable. But what you'd want to do is leapfrog past it. Say if that 311 is last summer, you'd want to leapfrog past that 311 next summer as you go through your training. And so maybe get to 315, 320, following building up your base and then doing your intervals. So kind of would need to get in there and check it out. But coming off of the resistance training plan, just to wrap this question up, I wouldn't expect to see like rock star power numbers.
Yeah. It also depends too, like, was that FTP test set outside when he did it and then this one inside? That could make it differ.
Yeah, and then the other thing that we see, unfortunately, that's all too common is different power meters. Was that 311 to 301 set on the same power meter? Was it a different one? Are you measuring, outdoor power to indoor power test, which is never apples to apples? And then what really Jedi mind messes with athletes is you do a test outdoors with their power meter, and then you do a test indoors with like their smart trainer power, and the smart trainer power may read low anyway. And then you add that on top of just, usually athletes can't make as much power indoors as they can outdoors. And then it's like, oh man, I was 30 watts less. And it's like, well, physiologically, that's probably not an accurate representation because you have those factors going on.
Yeah. So many.
We could do a whole nother podcast on data integrity and apples to apples.
Yeah. All right. Last question, last but not least.
Woohoo.
It comes from Jay Keene. He posted in our forum. He's on our 18 weeks of sweet spot plan, and he is from North Carolina. He says, "I've heard you guys talk about making the switch from base to race. Would you still consider the last 6 weeks of the 18 weeks of sweet spot as base building, or are the last 6 weeks getting into race at that point?"
Yes, but the sweet spot part 3 is beginning to introduce that wintertime intensity we podcasted about a few weeks ago. The short anaerobic forays on top of your sweet spot training. This is a progression from sweet spot part 2, and then you progress by adding in that wintertime intensity that you see in sweet spot part 3. But it's not the full-blown full gas intervals you'll face when you switch from base to race afterwards. So it provides a nice progression and small introduction into that intensity so that when it is time to switch to that intensity, you've done a little bit of training to kind of bridge the gap to get you those adaptations. And so it's the more you train, the more you can train. And so it gets you there. So you still want to do your sweet spot part 3. You still want to, switch to base after that.
All right. I think that about wraps it up for today.
All right. Well, thanks, Lacey. Thank you for putting together all those questions. And thank you to the listeners out there for submitting your questions. We're extremely grateful. If you're listening and you didn't ask a question, but you now have one, we have a great place for you to do so. It's forum.fastcatcoaching.com. You can go over there. You can, we'll post this podcast to there, and you can ask a follow-up question. You can ask a question to the answer of our questions here today if you want to discuss it. And that's how we roll. So thanks a lot for listening. Next week, we are going to do a special Valentine's podcast. It is a deviation of what I rolled out at the beginning of the year for our content calendar, but in the spirit of Valentine's coming up and how important it is to have healthy relationships, we are gonna do the relationship episode. And if anyone has any ideas on that, we're just basically going to, talk about, because we've joked on the podcast, happy wife, happy life. And then, a listener, got in touch with us, and I don't even know if it was a he or she, but they said, happy spouse, happy house, which I like even more. So we're going to talk about that, what we really mean. And I have some examples from athletes that I'm going to share, and maybe we'll reach out to some other happy house, happy spouse couples and get their feedback for how you can achieve a healthy relationship, or maybe make some changes, and then how that is going to impact your cycling performance. So until then, thank you for listening. And any final parting words of wisdom, Lacey?
Just go out and ride your bike. Have fun, ride fast, FDFP.
You said it yourself. I don't even need to say it. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll be back here next week.